6 months later, when Victoria Sterling finally admitted to herself that she was hopelessly in love with the man she had married for convenience, she would wonder if fate hadn't orchestrated everything from the beginning. But that Tuesday morning, as she held the phone with trembling hands, the only thing she could think about was how her life had crumbled in a matter of minutes. "Vic, are you listening to me?" Her father's hoarse voice echoed through the device, interrupting her thoughts. "I said we have until Friday." Victoria swallowed hard, adjusting her reading glasses on her nose as she looked out the window of her small apartment in Greenwich Village. Outside, the city buzzed with its usual morning energy, completely oblivious to the fact that her world was falling apart. "Dad, I don't understand. What do you mean, until Friday?" "Listen, sweetheart." Theodore Sterling sighed heavily from the other end of the line. "I didn't want to tell you, but the company is bankrupt. Completely. That investment in the Meridian Construction Company was a disaster. The project was canceled, contracts voided, and now I owe $3 million that I simply don't have." The world seemed to spin around Victoria. Her father, the man who had always been her rock, her source of security and stability, was going bankrupt. Sterling and Associates, the consulting firm he had built from scratch and that supported not only their family, but dozens of employees. But you said until Friday. What happens on Friday? That's when Alexander Blackwood will execute the debt. All the company's assets, our house in Connecticut, even Grandma Eleanor's apartment, everything will be confiscated. Victoria let out a small moan. The Connecticut house was where she had spent every summer of her childhood, running through the elaborate gardens and dreaming of being a famous writer. And Grandma Eleanor's apartment. It was the only home the 82-year-old lady had known for decades. "Who is Alexander Blackwood?" she asked, though the name sounded vaguely familiar. "Heir to the Blackwood Industries empire. You know, that family that practically owns half of Manhattan. He's the one collecting the debt." Of course, the Blackwood family. Victoria had read about them in Forbes countless times. Eccentric billionaires known as much for their ruthless business as for their eccentricities. And now one of them held her family's future in his hands. "Dad, there has to be something we can do. Some agreement, some—" "Actually," Theodore interrupted her, his voice taking on a strange, almost hesitant tone, "there is one possibility. Just one possibility, but—" "Vic, you're going to think I've completely lost my mind." Victoria's heart raced. "What is it?" "Alexander Blackwood made a proposal. He would cancel all the debt in exchange for—" "In exchange for what, Dad?" "A marriage. With you." The silence that followed was so profound that Victoria could hear the ticking of the wall clock in her apartment. She was sure she had misheard. "Sorry, could you repeat that?" "He wants to marry you, Victoria. A real legal marriage. In exchange, he forgives the entire debt, and the company continues operating normally." Victoria let the phone slip from her hand, falling onto the couch with a dull thud. Marriage? To a complete stranger? A billionaire who probably saw her as simple merchandise in a business transaction? "Vic? Vic, are you there?" She picked up the phone again, feeling her hands shake. "Dad, this is insane." "You don't even know this man. What if he's a psychopath? What if he's married? What if—" "He's not married, I checked. Actually, I researched him extensively after receiving the proposal yesterday. Alexander Blackwood, 32 years old, Harvard graduate in economics and Yale in law. Took over the family business when his father died 3 years ago. From what I could find out, he's a respected businessman. Rigid, perhaps, but honorable. And why on earth does he want to marry me? He doesn't even know me." Theodore hesitated. "Apparently, he needs to marry by the end of the year to fulfill a clause in his father's will. Something about proving he's settled and mature enough to fully inherit control of the company. If he doesn't marry by December, the presidency of Blackwood Industries passes to his cousin, Bartholomew." Victoria massaged her temples, feeling an epic headache forming. "And he just chose me? Randomly? It wasn't random. He told me he did extensive research on families in delicate financial situations with single, well-educated daughters. Your literature degree from Columbia and your master's in translation were decisive factors. My God, that sounds even worse. He chose me like I was a purebred poodle to buy. Vic. Her father's voice sounded tired, defeated. I know how this sounds. I know it's complete madness. But sweetheart, if you don't accept, I'm going to lose everything. It's not just about me. It's 60 employees who will be unemployed. It's your grandmother who will have to leave the apartment where she's lived for 40 years. He stopped talking, but Victoria could hear what he wasn't saying. It was about the dignity of a 65-year-old man who had built an empire and was about to see it crumble. It was about the pride of someone who had never asked anyone for help in his entire life. I need to think, she whispered. Of course, sweetheart, but... Vic? Yes? He wants an answer by tomorrow at 5 in the afternoon, and if you accept, the wedding needs to happen by the end of the week. After hanging up the phone, Victoria remained seated on her couch for approximately 2 hours, staring at the white wall in front of her as if it could magically provide all the answers she needed. Marry a stranger billionaire to save the family or let everything crumble. Option A. Sacrifice her freedom and possibly her mental sanity. Option B. Passively watch while everything her father built was destroyed. Great. Simply wonderful. At 11 in the morning, she did the only sensible thing she could think of. She called her best friend. Madison, are you sitting down? I am now. What happened? You sound like you've swallowed a frog. Worse. I received a marriage proposal. What? Madison's scream was so loud that Victoria had to pull the phone away from her ear. From whom? When? Why didn't you tell me you were dating someone? And why do you sound like you're going to a funeral instead of jumping for joy? Because I'm not dating anyone. And because the proposal came from an unknown billionaire who wants to use me as a wife of convenience to save my family from bankruptcy. The silence from the other end of the line lasted exactly 15 seconds. Okay. You're going to repeat that, but very slowly because I'm sure I heard wrong. Victoria told Madison the entire story, from her father's call to Alexander Blackwood's crazy will clause. When she finished, her friend let out a low whistle. Girl, your life turned into a Harlequin romance overnight. That doesn't help me, Maddie. Okay, let's think rationally. First, have you researched this guy? Victoria looked at her closed laptop on the coffee table. Not yet. Girl, first rule of modern arranged marriages, intensive Google stalking. Go there, open that computer and tell me everything you find about Mr. Mysterious. 20 minutes later, Victoria was staring at her laptop screen with her mouth slightly open. Maddie. What? Is he ugly? Bald? Does he look like a Disney movie villain? He's ridiculously handsome. On the screen, a Forbes photo showed Alexander Blackwood in an impeccable suit, leaving a commercial building in Manhattan. Dark, slightly wavy hair, intense green eyes, angular jaw that seemed to have been sculpted by Michelangelo on a particularly inspired day. He had that kind of classic aristocratic beauty that made normal people feel awkward just by looking. Define ridiculously handsome. The kind that could be a GQ cover model, but chose to dominate the financial world. Photos can lie. Keep researching. Victoria clicked on a few more articles. Alexander Blackwood appeared at charity events, always impeccably dressed, always alone. There were some photos of him with different women, all clearly companions for social events, none seeming to be a serious relationship. He seems serious, she commented, observing how he never smiled genuinely in the photos. Like, extremely serious. As if smiling were a form of weakness. Red flag number 1. Men who don't know how to smile are walking problems. But look at this. Victoria clicked on a charity article. He donated $5 million to a children's hospital last year, and here it says his company finances full scholarships for underprivileged students. Okay, that's good. Villains don't usually save little children. Victoria continued reading. Born into one of New York's wealthiest families. Impeccable education. took over the family business after his father's premature death in a car accident. For the past 3 years, he had expanded the Blackwood empire into completely new areas, becoming one of the most powerful and respected men in the American business scene. He seems competent, she said finally. Competent is different from psychopath. Research past relationships. More clicks, more articles. Alexander had dated a famous socialite for 6 months 2 years ago. Before that, he had been seen with an actress for a few weeks. Nothing serious, nothing lasting, nothing scandalous. Maddie, what if he's gay? Then you'd be the perfect fake couple. That doesn't help me decide. Okay, let's get to what matters. Can you imagine marrying him? Victoria looked again at the photo on the screen. Alexander was at a press conference, answering questions with a serious, controlled expression. There was something in his eyes, though. A sharp intelligence, but also a kind of distance that made Vic wonder if he had ever allowed himself to be vulnerable with anyone. I don't know, she admitted. I mean, he's obviously attractive and he doesn't seem to be a monster. But Maddie, it's a marriage of convenience. He doesn't love me. I don't love him. It would be like being formal roommates who happen to share the same last name. Or, Madison said slowly, it could be like one of those romances you love to read where two people marry for practical reasons and end up truly falling in love. Victoria's heart gave a small leap. It was true that she had devoured countless novels with that exact premise. But that was fiction. In real life, arranged marriages rarely ended with passionate declarations in the rain. What if he's horrible? What if he's controlling or sexist or... What if he's not? Vic, listen. Your family will lose everything if you don't accept, right? Right. And you're 28 years old, intelligent, independent, and strong enough to handle anything that comes your way, right? Right. So, in the worst-case scenario, you marry him, save your family, and then, if it doesn't work out, you divorce amicably in a few years. In the best-case scenario, you discover you married the love of your life. That night, Victoria was walking through Central Park, trying to put her thoughts in order. Autumn had painted the trees in golden and red tones, and the fresh air helped clear her mind. She thought about her father, the broken pride in his voice. She thought about Grandma Eleanor, who had lost her husband in World War II and had dedicated her entire life to caring for the family. She thought about the company employees, people she had known since childhood, who depended on those jobs to support their own families. And then she thought about herself. At 28, she had settled into a comfortable life, but without great passions. She worked as a freelance translator, lived alone in a small but cozy apartment, had some close friends and a predictable routine. She wasn't unhappy, but she also wasn't exactly living intensely. Maybe, just maybe, that crazy proposal was exactly the push she needed to get out of her comfort zone. At 10 at night, she called her father. Vic, how are you, sweetheart? Dad, I have some conditions. The silence on the other side was followed by a sigh of relief. Anything, sweetheart. Anything. First, I want to meet him personally before giving a final answer. I won't marry someone without at least having a face-to-face conversation. Of course, that makes sense. Second, if I accept, I want a detailed marriage contract, specifying exactly what his expectations are and what my rights are. Absolutely. And third, she took a deep breath. I want him to know that if we get married, I'm going into this with an open mind. It won't be just a business transaction for me. If he expects me to be just a paper wife, he chose the wrong person. Theodore remained silent for a few seconds. Vic, does this mean you're willing to consider the possibility? Victoria looked at the night sky, where the first stars were beginning to appear among the city lights. It means I'm going to meet Alexander Blackwood tomorrow and find out if he's someone I can imagine sharing a life with, even if it's a complicated and unconventional life. I'll call him right now. Dad? Yes? I hope you know what you're getting me into. Me too, sweetheart. Me too. After hanging up, Victoria remained seated on the park bench for a few more minutes, watching people pass by. Couples walking hand in hand, families returning home after a day in the park, young people heading out for the city's nightlife. In less than 24 hours, she would be face to face with the man who could become her husband. The idea was simultaneously terrifying and, strangely, exciting. Victoria Sterling, who had spent her entire life carefully planning every step, was about to take the most impulsive and risky leap of her entire existence. And, for the first time in years, she felt truly alive. Victoria Sterling had imagined many scenarios for meeting her potential husband. None of them involved spilling coffee on his $1,000 shoes. The Blackwood Industries building rose into the Manhattan sky like a monument to corporate power, all gleaming glass and sharp angles that seemed designed to intimidate anyone foolish enough to challenge its occupants. Victoria stood on the sidewalk, clutching her purse and trying to convince herself that the butterflies in her stomach were excitement, not terror. "You can do this," she whispered to herself, smoothing down her navy blue dress, the most professional outfit she owned. "It's just a conversation. A perfectly normal conversation with a billionaire who wants to marry you to fulfill a will clause. Totally normal." The lobby was exactly what she'd expected. Marble floors so polished she could see her reflection, abstract art that probably cost more than her annual rent, and a reception desk that looked like it had been designed by someone who considered intimidation an art form. "Victoria Sterling to see Alexander Blackwood," she told the receptionist, a perfectly coiffed woman who looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine. 42nd floor. "Mr. Blackwood is expecting you." The elevator ride felt eternal. Victoria watched the floor numbers climb while practicing breathing exercises and trying not to think about how her entire family's future depended on the next hour. When the doors finally opened, she was greeted by another impossibly elegant woman. "Ms. Sterling? I'm Rebecca, Mr. Blackwood's assistant. He's ready for you." The walk down the hallway felt like a march to execution. Victoria's heels clicked against the hardwood floors with each step, creating an echo that seemed to announce her arrival to the entire building. When Rebecca stopped at a set of double doors and knocked, Victoria's heart nearly jumped out of her chest. "Come in." The voice was deep, cultured, with just a hint of an accent she couldn't place. Victoria took a deep breath and stepped inside. If the building was designed to intimidate, Alexander Blackwood's office was designed to conquer. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of Central Park, while the office itself was a study in understated luxury. Dark wood, leather furniture, and what looked like original artwork created an atmosphere that whispered power in every corner. And behind the massive mahogany desk sat the man himself. The photos hadn't done him justice. Alexander Blackwood was tall, she could tell even with him sitting, with the kind of presence that filled a room. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his green eyes were sharp and assessing, and he wore a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than her car. But what struck her most was how completely still he was. No fidgeting, no unnecessary movements, just an almost predatory focus as he studied her. "Mrs. Sterling." He stood, extending his hand across the desk. "Thank you for coming." His handshake was firm, brief, and somehow managed to convey both politeness and complete control. Victoria tried not to notice how warm his hand was, or how the simple contact made her pulse quicken. "Mr. Blackwood, I have to say this is unusual. Please, sit." He gestured to one of the leather chairs facing his desk. "Would you like coffee? Water?" "Coffee would be great, thank you." He pressed a button on his phone. "Rebecca, 2 coffees, please." Then those green eyes were back on her, studying her with an intensity that made her feel like a specimen under a microscope. "I assume your father explained the situation," he said without preamble. "The broad strokes, yes. You need a wife. We need $3 million. It's very transactional." Something flickered in his eyes. Amusement? Irritation? It was gone too quickly to tell. "I prefer to think of it as mutually beneficial." "Is that what you call it?" Victoria leaned back in her chair, surprised by her own boldness. From where I'm sitting, it looks like you're shopping for a wife the same way someone might shop for a car, checking the specs, making sure all the paperwork is in order. This time she was sure she saw amusement. I researched you thoroughly, yes, your education, your family background, your suitability for the role. Suitability. Victoria repeated the word like it tasted bitter. What exactly makes someone suitable to be your wife, Mr. Blackwood? He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. Intelligence, independence, the ability to handle social situations without embarrassing either of us. No criminal background, no drug addictions, no obvious psychological disorders. Wow, you really know how to make a girl feel special. Rebecca entered with a coffee service that probably cost more than Victoria's monthly grocery budget. After she left, Alexander poured 2 cups with the precise movements of someone who did everything with calculated efficiency. I'm not trying to make you feel special, Ms. Sterling. I'm trying to be honest about what this arrangement would entail. Victoria accepted the coffee cup, inhaling the rich aroma. It was predictably the best coffee she'd ever tasted. And what exactly would it entail? A marriage that satisfies the terms of my father's will. Public appearances as needed. Separate living arrangements unless public events require otherwise. Minimal interference in each other's personal lives. Separate living arrangements? Victoria raised an eyebrow. How very modern of you. I have no interest in playing house, Ms. Sterling. This is a business arrangement. Right, a business arrangement. She took a sip of coffee, using the moment to study him over the rim of her cup. Can I ask you something? Of course. Why marriage? Why not just find some other way to prove you're settled and mature? Seems like running a multi-billion-dollar corporation would be proof enough. For the first time since she'd entered the office, Alexander's composure slipped slightly. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and when he spoke, there was an edge to his voice. My father had very specific ideas about responsibility and legacy. In his mind, a man who couldn't commit to marriage couldn't be trusted to commit to anything else. And you agree with that? It doesn't matter what I agree with. It matters what the will says. Victoria set down her coffee cup, the delicate china making a soft clink against the saucer. You know what I find interesting, Mr. Blackwood? What's that? You've told me what you need from this arrangement, what the terms would be, even what qualifications you were looking for in a wife. But you haven't asked me a single question about what I might want. Alexander was quiet for a long moment, those green eyes studying her with renewed interest. What do you want, Mrs. Sterling? The question hung in the air between them, weighted with more significance than either of them had expected. Victoria found herself really looking at him for the first time, not at the intimidating billionaire or the answer to her family's problems, but at the man sitting across from her. There was something lonely about him, she realized. Something isolated and carefully controlled that made her wonder when he'd last had a conversation that wasn't about business or strategy or acquiring something. I want honesty, she said finally. If we do this, I don't want to spend the next however many years pretending to be something I'm not. I'm not a socialite. I don't care about fashion or charity galas or whatever it is that billionaire wives are supposed to care about. I read books. I translate obscure literary works for small publishers, and I think most high society events are pretentious nonsense. Alexander blinked, clearly not having expected such directness. I also want respect, Victoria continued, warming to her theme. I won't be treated like an employee or an acquisition. If we're married, even if it's just on paper, we're partners. That means I get a say in decisions that affect both of us. Anything else? His voice was carefully neutral, but she caught a hint of something that might have been respect. Yes, actually. Victoria smiled, and for the first time since entering his office, she felt like she had the upper hand. I want to know why you chose me. And don't give me that line about research and qualifications. There are probably hundreds of women in New York who fit your criteria. Why me, specifically? Alexander was quiet for so long that Victoria began to think he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than before. You translated Neruda's 20 love poems for Meridian Press last year. Victoria blinked in surprise. You read my translation? I have a first edition of the original Spanish. I wanted to see how you'd handle the nuances of his romantic imagery in English. He paused, something almost vulnerable flickering across his features. It was beautiful. You didn't just translate the words. You translated the emotion. For a moment, the corporate mask slipped entirely, and Victoria caught a glimpse of something unexpected. Genuine appreciation for her work. It was the last thing she'd expected from this calculated businessman. So you chose me because I can translate poetry? I chose you because anyone who can capture the essence of love in a foreign language might be able to understand the value of an unconventional partnership. They stared at each other across the desk, and Victoria felt something shift in the air between them. The dynamic had changed, become something more complex than a simple business negotiation. Mr. Blackwood, Alexander, if we're going to be married, you should probably use my first name. Alexander? The name felt strange on her tongue, intimate in a way that made her pulse quicken. I need you to understand something. If I agree to this, it won't be just a business arrangement for me. I'm not built that way. I don't know how to be emotionally detached from the people in my life. What are you saying? Victoria stood, smoothing down her dress as she prepared to deliver what might be the most important words of her life. I'm saying that if we do this, there's a very real possibility that I might fall in love with you. And I need to know if you can handle that possibility, or if you're going to spend our entire marriage treating me like a beautiful piece of furniture. The silence that followed was deafening. Alexander stood as well, moving around the desk until he was standing directly in front of her. Up close, he was even more imposing, but Victoria held her ground. Ms. Sterling, Victoria, he said quietly. I think you might be the most dangerous woman I've ever met. Is that a yes or a no to my proposal? A slow smile spread across Alexander's face, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. It transformed his entire face, making him look younger and infinitely more approachable. It's a yes to everything. The marriage, the partnership, and the possibility that this might be the best decision either of us has ever made. Victoria felt her heart skip a beat. So we're really doing this? We're really doing this. He extended his hand again, but this time it felt like a beginning rather than a business transaction. Welcome to the most unconventional marriage contract in Manhattan, Mrs. Blackwood-to-be. As Victoria shook his hand, she realized that her life had just changed forever, and for the first time since this whole crazy situation began, she was genuinely excited to see what happened next. 3 days later, Victoria Sterling realized that marrying a billionaire came with more paperwork than buying a house, applying for a mortgage, and filing taxes combined. The prenuptial agreement alone was 47 pages of legal jargon that made her head spin. This clause here, she said, pointing to page 15 while sitting in the law offices of Hartwell and Associates, says I'm entitled to reasonable personal expenses. What exactly constitutes reasonable to someone who probably spends more on coffee than I make in a month? Alexander, who sat across from her looking perfectly composed despite the chaos of documents spread between them, almost smiled. Whatever you need, Victoria. The point isn't to restrict you. It's to protect both of us legally. Right. And this part? She flipped to page 23. It says we're required to attend a minimum of 12 social events together annually and maintain appropriate public displays of affection. Are we talking hand-holding or full-on Broadway musical numbers? This time he did smile. I think we can skip the choreography. Their lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia Hartwell, cleared her throat diplomatically. Perhaps we should focus on the residential arrangements clause. Mr. Blackwood, you've indicated separate quarters? The penthouse has 2 master suites, Alexander explained. Completely separate, with private entrances if desired. Victoria would have full autonomy over her space. Victoria looked up from the contract. You know, for a fake marriage, you've thought of everything. Almost like you've done this before. I'm thorough about everything I do. Including choosing wives? Especially choosing wives. The way he said it, with that hint of warmth she was beginning to recognize, made Victoria's stomach flutter. She was still adjusting to the fact that Alexander Blackwood, the man Forbes had dubbed Manhattan's most ruthless bachelor, could be almost charming when he wanted to be. Now, Patricia continued, about the duration clause. The will specifies marriage before December 31st, but doesn't indicate a minimum length. How long are you planning to maintain this arrangement? Victoria and Alexander looked at each other. It was a question neither had directly addressed. Until the inheritance is secure, Alexander said carefully, which should be within a year of the marriage. And then? Victoria asked. Then we reassess. Something about his answer bothered her, though she couldn't put her finger on what. Before she could analyze it further, her phone buzzed with a text from Madison. Emergency brunch meeting. Need details about Mr. Mysterious ASAP. I'm sorry, Victoria said, gathering her purse. I need to step out for a moment. She found herself in the building's elegant lobby, dialing Madison's number. Tell me everything, Madison demanded without preamble. We're signing the papers today. The wedding is Saturday. Saturday? As in, this Saturday? As in, 5 days from now? He doesn't believe in long engagements. Vic, are you completely insane? You've known this man for 3 days. Victoria sank into one of the lobby's plush armchairs. I know it sounds crazy. It doesn't sound crazy. It is crazy. You're marrying a stranger. He's not exactly a stranger anymore. Victoria found herself smiling. Did you know he speaks 4 languages? And he's read every book on my favorite authors list. Yesterday he sent me a first edition of Virginia Woolf's letters with a note about how my translation work reminded him of her approach to language. Oh no. What? You're falling for him already, aren't you? Victoria was quiet for a moment, watching well-dressed people hurry through the lobby with their important Manhattan lives. Maybe. A little. Is that terrible? It's not terrible, it's just complicated. What if he doesn't feel the same way? Then I'll deal with that when it happens. Madison, for the first time in years, I feel like I'm actually living instead of just existing. Even if this all falls apart spectacularly, at least I'll have tried something extraordinary. When Victoria returned to the conference room, she found Alexander alone, studying something on his phone with a frown. Everything all right? She asked. My cousin Bartholomew just announced his engagement to Senator Morrison's daughter. Alexander's jaw tightened. Quite the coincidence, considering the timing. You think he's trying to position himself as the more stable heir? I think Bartholomew has never done anything that wasn't calculated to benefit himself. Alexander set down his phone and looked at her directly. Victoria, I need you to understand something. Once we do this, there will be scrutiny. Press attention, social obligations, people who will try to find fault with everything we do. Are you prepared for that? The question hung between them, heavy with implication. Victoria thought about her quiet life, her small apartment, her anonymous existence in a city of millions. Are you trying to give me an out? I'm trying to make sure you know what you're signing up for. Victoria moved closer to the table, placing her hands flat on the surface as she leaned toward him. Alexander, let me ask you something. When you read my translation of Neruda, what was your favorite line? He blinked, clearly not expecting the question. Love is so short, forgetting is so long. Mine too. Do you know why? Tell me. Because it's about taking risks even when you know they might not last forever. Sometimes the beauty is in the brevity, in the courage to try something even when the ending is uncertain. Alexander stared at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. You continually surprise me. Good. Life's more interesting when people surprise each other. Patricia returned with revised documents. I've made the changes we discussed. Mr. Blackwood, the clause about public appearances now includes Victoria's right to approve or decline specific events. Victoria, your separate asset protection is now ironclad. As Victoria signed her name on the final page, she felt like she was signing more than a contract. She was signing up for an adventure that could either be the best or worst decision of her life. One more thing, Alexander said as they prepared to leave. I've arranged for a stylist to help you with the social requirements of our arrangement. Victoria bristled. Excuse me? The charity gala next week, the museum board dinner, Are you saying I don't know how to dress myself? I'm saying that the wife of Alexander Blackwood will be photographed and scrutinized. I want to make sure you're comfortable in those situations. Victoria felt her temper flare. So you want to dress me up like a doll? I want to give you the tools to succeed in a world that can be unforgiving to outsiders. Something in his tone made her pause. There was experience there, maybe even pain. Have you always lived in that world? Since I was born, and I've watched it destroy people who weren't prepared for it. The admission was quiet, almost vulnerable. Victoria felt her anger deflate. Okay, she said softly. But I get final approval on everything, and if your stylist tries to turn me into someone I'm not, I'm walking out. Deal. As they stood to leave, Alexander offered her his arm with old-fashioned courtesy. Mrs. Blackwood-to-be, shall we go plan our wedding? Victoria slipped her hand through his arm, surprised by how natural the gesture felt. Lead the way, Mr. Blackwood-to-be. Walking through Manhattan beside him, Victoria realized that somewhere between signing the contract and arguing about stylists, something fundamental had shifted. This wasn't just a business arrangement anymore. It was the beginning of something neither of them fully understood yet. And for the first time since this whole crazy situation began, Victoria found herself genuinely curious about what kind of life they might build together, even if it started with the world's most unusual foundation. Saturday couldn't come fast enough. But first, apparently, she had to survive meeting a stylist who worked for someone who thought reasonable expenses included designer gowns that cost more than her annual rent. This was going to be interesting. Victoria Sterling had dreamed of her wedding day since she was 7 years old. In none of those dreams had she been hyperventilating in a bathroom stall at City Hall while wearing a dress that cost more than her car. Victoria, you've been in there for 10 minutes. Madison's voice carried through the bathroom door. Your billionaire is going to think you've made a run for it. Maybe I should, Victoria called back, pressing her forehead against the cool metal door. This is insane, Maddie. I'm about to marry a man I've known for exactly 1 week. A week and 2 days, Madison corrected, and you're forgetting the most important part. Which is? He looks at you like you're the only person in the room. Victoria unlocked the stall door and emerged to face her reflection in the mirror. The stylist Alexander had hired, a terrifyingly efficient woman named Celeste, had worked actual magic. The cream silk dress was simple but elegant. Her hair was perfectly styled, and somehow Celeste had managed to make her look like she belonged in Alexander's world without losing herself entirely. He does not look at me like that, Victoria protested, though her heart fluttered at the thought. Please. Yesterday at the rehearsal dinner I watched him ignore a conversation with 2 senators because you were laughing at something your dad said. The man is smitten. Victoria touched up her lipstick with shaking hands. It doesn't matter. This is a business arrangement, remember? Right. Keep telling yourself that. A soft knock interrupted them. Victoria? It was her father's voice. It's time. When Victoria opened the bathroom door, Theodore Sterling's eyes immediately filled with tears. You look beautiful, sweetheart. Dad, don't start crying or I'll start crying, and then Celeste will kill us both. Theodore offered her his arm. Are you ready for this? Victoria looked toward the hallway that led to the small ceremony room where Alexander was waiting, where her entire future was waiting. As ready as someone can be for the most impulsive decision of their life. The ceremony room at City Hall was elegant in its simplicity. Hardwood floors, tall windows, and a few rows of chairs for their small group of witnesses. Alexander stood at the front with the officiant, and when Victoria entered, his entire demeanor changed. Madison was right. The way he looked at her made her feel like the only person in the world. He was devastatingly handsome in his charcoal gray suit, but it was the expression on his face that made Victoria's breath catch. Not the controlled businessman she'd come to know, but something softer, more open, almost hopeful. As her father walked her down the short aisle, Victoria caught sight of their witnesses. Madison beaming with excitement, her grandmother Eleanor dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. Alexander's business partner James looking bemused but supportive, and in the back row, a stern-faced older man she didn't recognize. "Who's that?" she whispered to Alexander when she reached him. "My Uncle Richard, Bartholomew's father. He wanted to witness the proceedings personally." Charming family dynamic. You have no idea. The officiant, a kind-faced woman in her 50s, smiled at them. "Shall we begin?" What followed was the strangest wedding ceremony in the history of Manhattan. Victoria found herself making traditional vows while acutely aware that everything about their situation was anything but traditional. When Alexander promised to love and cherish her, his voice was steady, but she caught something in his eyes that made her wonder if he was thinking about more than just fulfilling a legal obligation. "Do you, Victoria Sterling, take Alexander Blackwood to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Victoria looked into Alexander's green eyes and felt a jolt of certainty that surprised her. "I do." "Do you, Alexander Blackwood, take Victoria Sterling to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." His voice was firm, unwavering, and when he said it, Victoria felt like he was making a promise that went beyond the words required by law. "You may kiss the bride." This was the moment Victoria had been dreading. Their first kiss, performed for an audience, sealing a marriage that was supposed to be purely practical. Alexander stepped closer, his hands gently framing her face, and for a moment the rest of the world disappeared. When his lips touched hers, it was soft, tentative, almost questioning. But when Victoria responded, something shifted. The kiss deepened, became something real and electric that made her forget they were performing for witnesses. When they broke apart, Alexander's eyes were dark with surprise, and Victoria felt her cheeks flush. That had definitely not felt like a business transaction. The applause from their small audience broke the spell, and suddenly they were being congratulated, signing papers, and posing for photos that would undoubtedly end up in tomorrow's society pages. "Well," Alexander murmured as they signed the marriage certificate, "we're officially married." "Officially," Victoria agreed, though her lips were still tingling from their kiss. Uncle Richard approached them as they finished the paperwork, his expression unreadable. "Alexander, congratulations on your strategic timing." "Thank you, Uncle Richard." "Victoria, this is my father's brother, Richard Blackwood." Richard studied Victoria with calculating eyes. "Ms. Sterling, pardon me, Mrs. Blackwood, how fortuitous that you were available for such a sudden arrangement." Victoria felt Alexander tense beside her, but before he could respond, she smiled sweetly. "Actually, it's Dr. Sterling Blackwood. I kept my name professionally." And yes, Alexander swept me off my feet quite quickly. "When you know, you know." She slipped her hand into Alexander's and was surprised when he squeezed it gently. Richard's expression soured slightly. "Of course. Well, I'm sure Bartholomew will be eager to meet his new cousin at the board meeting next week." After Richard left, Alexander turned to Victoria with something that looked suspiciously like admiration. "Dr. Sterling Blackwood? I have a master's degree. Technically, it qualifies. And your uncle seemed like the type who needed to know he couldn't intimidate me. You realize you just declared war on one of the most powerful men in New York? Good thing I married someone more powerful." Alexander laughed. Actually laughed, and the sound sent warmth spreading through Victoria's chest. "Mrs. Blackwood, I think you're going to fit into this family better than anyone expected." The reception was held at Alexander's penthouse, a space so elegant it belonged in an architectural magazine. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered stunning views of the city, while tasteful modern furniture and carefully selected artwork created an atmosphere of sophisticated comfort. Victoria found herself standing on the terrace with Madison, champagne glass in hand, watching the sun set over Manhattan. "So," Madison said, "how does it feel to be Mrs. Billionaire?" "Surreal. This morning I was Victoria Sterling, struggling translator. Tonight I'm Victoria Sterling Blackwood, billionaire's wife. Any regrets?" Victoria watched through the windows as Alexander chatted with her father and grandmother, his usual stern expression replaced by something warmer, as he listened to Eleanor tell what was undoubtedly an embarrassing story about Victoria's childhood. Ask me in a year. Victoria? Alexander appeared in the doorway. Your grandmother is insisting on showing me your baby photos. I thought you might want to supervise. Oh God. Madison, emergency intervention required. But as she hurried inside to save herself from childhood embarrassment, Victoria caught Alexander's eye and saw something there that made her pause. He was enjoying this, the family chaos, the teasing, the normalcy of it all. For someone who'd grown up in a world of calculated social interactions and strategic relationships, maybe a family that actually liked each other was as foreign and appealing as her world had been to her. Later that evening, after the guests had gone home and they were alone in the penthouse, Victoria found herself standing awkwardly in the living room while Alexander loosened his tie. So, she said finally, this is weird. Incredibly weird, he agreed. Should we establish some ground rules about sharing space and privacy and Victoria? Alexander's voice was gentle. We're both adults. We'll figure it out as we go. He moved closer, and for a moment Victoria thought he might kiss her again. Instead, he reached up and carefully removed a bobby pin that had come loose from her hair. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? For saying yes. For giving this a chance, for handling Uncle Richard like the formidable woman you are. Standing there in her wedding dress looking up at her new husband in the soft light of their shared home, Victoria felt something shift inside her chest. This wasn't just about saving her family anymore. This wasn't just a business arrangement. This was the beginning of something that could either be wonderful or break her heart completely. Alexander? Yes? I think we might actually be able to make this work. His smile was soft, genuine, and completely devastating. Mrs. Blackwood, I think you might be right. As Victoria finally headed to her own room that night, she realized that somewhere between I do and good night, she'd stopped thinking of Alexander Blackwood as a stranger she'd married for convenience. She'd started thinking of him as her husband, and that was either the best or most dangerous development of all. 2 weeks into marriage, Victoria Sterling Blackwood discovered that living with Alexander was like sharing space with a beautiful, well-dressed hurricane who had very strong opinions about coffee temperature and newspaper folding techniques. You realize, she said standing in the kitchen doorway in her pajamas and fuzzy slippers, that it's perfectly acceptable to read the newspaper without refolding each section into geometrically perfect rectangles. Alexander looked up from his precisely arranged breakfast table, where every section of the Wall Street Journal sat in neat parallel lines. He was already dressed in an impeccable navy suit, despite it being barely 7 in the morning. Efficiency, Victoria. If everything has its place, you never waste time looking for what you need. It's a newspaper, not nuclear launch codes. Organization is organization. Victoria poured herself coffee from the machine that probably cost more than her old rent, and took a deliberately large, unladylike gulp. You know what I think? I'm sure you're going to tell me. I think you're afraid of chaos, like genuinely terrified that if one thing is out of place, your entire world will collapse. Alexander's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. That's ridiculous. Is it? Yesterday I moved your coffee mug 2 inches to the left and you physically flinched. I did not flinch. You absolutely flinched. It was like I'd committed a federal crime against kitchenware. They stared at each other across the kitchen island, and Victoria realized this was their first real disagreement as a married couple. It felt strangely domestic. Victoria, Alexander said carefully, some of us appreciate order, and some of us appreciate spontaneity. Watch this. Victoria deliberately knocked her spoon off the counter, where it clattered to the floor with a metallic ring. Alexander's eye twitched. Feel better? She asked sweetly. Immensely. Despite his sarcasm, Victoria caught the hint of a smile tugging at his lips. She was learning to read his micro-expressions, the tiny cracks in his composed facade that revealed what he was really thinking. Their morning routine had become an intricate dance over the past 2 weeks. Alexander rose at 5:30 for his workout, shower, and precisely timed breakfast. Victoria stumbled to the coffee machine around 7:30, usually wearing whatever she'd slept in and sporting hair that defied several laws of physics. Somehow, it worked. "Speaking of organization," Alexander said, consulting his phone, "we have the Morrison Charity Gala tonight." Victoria groaned. "The one where I have to smile and nod while people discuss their second homes in the Hamptons? The one where we make our first major public appearance as a couple? The society pages will be watching everything we do. No pressure at all." Alexander studied her face with the intensity he usually reserved for quarterly reports. "You're nervous." "I'm terrified. Your world isn't exactly my natural habitat, Alexander. I'm more comfortable discussing Dostoevsky than discussing yacht specifications." "Then discuss Dostoevsky. At a charity gala? Why not? Half the people there probably haven't read a book since college. You'll be refreshing." Victoria felt a flutter of warmth at his confidence in her. Over the past 2 weeks, Alexander had shown an unexpected talent for making her feel capable of handling anything. "What if I embarrass you?" Alexander crossed the kitchen and stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and subtly masculine that made her stomach flutter. "Victoria, you held your own against Uncle Richard at our wedding. You translated Neruda's most complex poems into English poetry that made me understand why people fall in love. You think you're going to embarrass me by being intelligent and authentic? Well, when you put it like that. Besides," his voice dropped to that low, intimate tone that did dangerous things to her pulse, "you'll be the most beautiful woman there." For a moment they stood frozen, the air between them charged with something that definitely wasn't part of their business arrangement. Victoria found herself staring at Alexander's mouth, remembering their wedding kiss and wondering what it would be like to kiss him when they weren't performing for an audience. Alexander's phone buzzed, breaking the spell. He stepped back, his professional mask sliding back into place. "That's my driver. I need to go." "Alexander, I'll see you tonight. The dress Celeste selected is in your closet." And then he was gone, leaving Victoria standing in the kitchen with her heart racing and the distinct feeling that they'd been on the verge of something important. That evening, Victoria stood in front of her bedroom mirror, hardly recognizing herself. The dress was a deep emerald green that somehow made her eyes look mysterious and her skin luminous. Her hair was swept up in an elegant style, and the diamond earrings Alexander had given her as a wedding gift caught the light perfectly. She looked like she belonged in his world. The realization was both thrilling and terrifying. "You look stunning." Alexander's voice from the doorway made her turn. He stood there in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, and Victoria's mouth went dry. "You clean up pretty well yourself, Mr. Blackwood. Shall we?" The gala was held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and stepping into the main hall was like entering a fairy tale. The space was filled with Manhattan's elite, all dressed in designer gowns and tuxedos, champagne glasses in hand as they mingled beneath priceless artwork. "Remember," Alexander murmured as they entered, "we're madly in love newlyweds who can't keep our hands off each other." "Right, madly in love. Got it." But when Alexander placed his hand on the small of her back to guide her through the crowd, Victoria didn't have to fake the way her breath caught. For the first hour, everything went perfectly. Victoria charmed a group of museum board members with her insights about contemporary translation theory. Alexander beamed with what looked like genuine pride as she held her own in conversations about art and literature. They were the perfect power couple. Then Bartholomew Blackwood arrived. "Well, well," came a smooth voice behind them. "If it isn't the happy newlyweds." Victoria turned to see a man who looked like Alexander's darker reflection. Same height, similar features, but where Alexander had warmth in his eyes, Bartholomew had calculation. "Bartholomew," Alexander's voice was carefully neutral. "Victoria, meet my cousin." The famous Dr. Sterling Blackwood. Bartholomew took her hand and kissed it with theatrical gallantry. Such a whirlwind romance. One might almost think it was convenient. Victoria felt Alexander tense beside her. "Actually, it was inevitable," she said smoothly. When Alexander and I met, it was like finding the missing piece of a puzzle I didn't know I was solving. How poetic, and how fortunate that your family's financial difficulties resolved themselves so quickly after the engagement. The temperature in the immediate vicinity seemed to drop 10 degrees. Victoria realized that Bartholomew wasn't just making conversation. He was declaring war. "Yes," she said, her voice like honey over steel. "It's amazing how life works out when you're brave enough to take risks for love instead of playing it safe out of fear." Bartholomew's smile turned predatory. "Speaking of risks, Alexander, I heard about the Henderson merger falling through. Unfortunate timing considering the board meeting next month." "Business is business, Bartholomew. Some of us focus on long-term strategy rather than quarterly gossip." "Of course, though I wonder what the board will think about your domestic stability when the Peterson account review comes up." Victoria felt something snap inside her. "You know what I find fascinating about family dynamics?" she said, stepping closer to Bartholomew with a smile that could cut glass. "How some people mistake manipulation for intelligence. Alexander doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. His results speak for themselves. But if anyone wants to question his judgment, they're welcome to question mine as well." She moved to Alexander's side, slipping her arm through his. "After all, I'm the one who chose him." Bartholomew's mask slipped slightly, revealing something ugly underneath. "How refreshing to meet someone so direct." "I prefer honest," Victoria replied. "It saves time." After Bartholomew melted back into the crowd, Alexander looked down at Victoria with something like awe. That was probably too much. That was magnificent. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of introductions and conversations, but Victoria found herself increasingly aware of Alexander beside her. The way he guided her through conversations, the pride in his voice when he introduced her, the protective way he positioned himself when anyone got too close. It felt real, too real. On the drive home, they sat in comfortable silence until Alexander spoke. "You realize Bartholomew will try to retaliate for tonight? Let him try. I didn't like him. Most people are afraid of him. I'm not most people." Alexander turned to look at her, something unreadable in his expression. "No, you're not." Back at the penthouse, they stood in the living room, suddenly awkward now that the performance was over. "Victoria," Alexander said quietly, "tonight, when you defended me to Bartholomew, what about it? You didn't have to do that. This arrangement doesn't require you to fight my family battles." Victoria studied his face, seeing vulnerability beneath the controlled exterior. "Alexander, what exactly do you think this arrangement is?" "A mutually beneficial partnership." "Right. Partners have each other's backs. That's what partners do." Something shifted in Alexander's expression, became softer, more open. "Is that what we are? Partners?" Victoria stepped closer, close enough to see the flecks of gold in his green eyes. "I think we're whatever we decide to be." For a moment, she thought he might kiss her again. Instead, he reached up and gently touched her cheek. "Good night, Victoria." "Good night, Alexander." As she watched him walk toward his room, Victoria realized that somewhere between defending him to his cousin and standing together as a united front, something fundamental had changed between them. They weren't just playing at being married anymore. They were becoming something real. And that was either the most wonderful or most dangerous thing that could happen to two people who'd started as strangers with a contract. 3 weeks after the gala, Victoria Sterling Blackwood learned that falling in love with your fake husband was significantly more complicated than romance novels had led her to believe. The realization hit her at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, when she found Alexander in his study, still in his work clothes from the day before, surrounded by financial reports and looking more exhausted than she'd ever seen him. "Alexander?" She stood in the doorway wearing an oversized sweater and concern. "It's almost 3 in the morning." He looked up, his usually perfect hair disheveled, his tie loosened and hanging around his neck like a defeated flag. "The Peterson merger is falling apart." "The one Bartholomew mentioned?" "Among others." Alexander rubbed his eyes with the heels of his hands. 3 major deals, all suddenly developing complications, all with clients who have connections to my dear cousin. Victoria moved into the study, her bare feet silent on the hardwood floor. He's sabotaging you. Systematically and brilliantly. There was grudging admiration in Alexander's voice. I trained him too well when we were younger. What does this mean for the company? Alexander's laugh was bitter. It means that marrying you might not be enough to satisfy the board that I'm the stable choice for leadership. Bartholomew is positioning himself as the responsible alternative to my impulsive decisions. Victoria felt something cold settle in her stomach. He's calling our marriage an impulsive decision? A desperate attempt to fulfill the will's requirements without any genuine commitment to stability. Alexander's green eyes met hers across the room. He's not entirely wrong. The words hit Victoria like a physical blow. What's that supposed to mean? Victoria. Alexander stood, running a hand through his hair. We both know what this is, what it was supposed to be. Was supposed to be? A business arrangement, a mutually beneficial solution to our respective problems. Victoria stared at him, feeling something crack inside her chest. Is that still what you think this is? Alexander's silence stretched between them like a chasm. I see. Victoria's voice was carefully controlled, but Alexander caught the hurt underneath. Well, thank you for the clarification. She turned to leave, but Alexander's voice stopped her. Victoria, wait. No, it's fine. You're absolutely right. This is a business arrangement. I just forgot that for a moment. That's not what I meant. Isn't it? Victoria turned back to face him, and Alexander saw tears threatening in her eyes. Because it sounded exactly like what you meant. It sounded like you were reminding both of us not to get confused about what this really is. Victoria, I defended you to your cousin. I've attended your charity galas and board dinners. I've played the perfect wife for your business associates and your family. But apparently, I've been playing it a little too well. Alexander moved toward her, but Victoria stepped back. Just don't. She wrapped her arms around herself. I need some air. It's 3 a.m. Then I need some air at 3 a.m. Victoria grabbed her coat and keys, leaving Alexander standing alone in his study with the devastating realization that he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life. She found herself in Central Park, sitting on the same bench where she'd made the decision to meet Alexander in the first place. The city was quiet at this hour, just the distant sound of traffic and the occasional jogger passing by. Her phone buzzed with a text from Madison. Emergency wine required. I can be there in 20 minutes. Instead of answering, Victoria called. Okay, Madison said without preamble. What did the billionaire do? He reminded me that our marriage is fake. Ouch. Context? Victoria told her about the conversation, about Bartholomew's sabotage, about the way Alexander had looked at her when he said their marriage was just a business arrangement. Vic, Madison said gently, are you in love with him? The question hung in the night air. Demanding an honest answer, Victoria wasn't sure she was ready to give. Yes, she whispered. I think I have been for weeks. And you think he doesn't feel the same way? I think he's terrified of feeling the same way. So what are you going to do about it? Victoria looked up at the stars barely visible through the city lights. I have no idea. When Victoria returned to the penthouse an hour later, she found Alexander waiting in the living room, still dressed in his rumpled work clothes, holding 2 cups of tea. I made chamomile, he said quietly. I know you like it when you can't sleep. Victoria accepted the cup but didn't sit down. Alexander, we need to talk. I know. Victoria, about what I said. Let me go first. Victoria set down her tea and faced him directly. I've been thinking about our arrangement, about what it was supposed to be versus what it's become. Alexander's jaw tightened. Victoria, I've fallen in love with you. The words came out rushed, like she was afraid she'd lose courage if she didn't say them immediately. Alexander went completely still. I know that wasn't part of the plan, Victoria continued, her voice gaining strength. I know it complicates everything, But I can't keep pretending that this is just business for me anymore. Victoria, Alexander's voice was strained. I love the way you fold newspapers with geometric precision because it makes you feel in control of at least one small thing in your complicated world. I love that you donate to children's hospitals but never want credit for it. I love that you read poetry in 3 languages and remember every conversation we've ever had about books. She stepped closer, her heart pounding. I love that you trusted me enough to let me into your world, even when it meant risking everything. And I love that when you look at me, you see someone worth defending and protecting and loving. Alexander's composure finally cracked. Victoria, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. You're scared. You've spent your entire life believing that love is weakness, that caring about someone makes you vulnerable. But Alexander, what we have isn't weakness. It's the strongest thing I've ever been part of. What if Bartholomew is right? Alexander's voice was barely above a whisper. What if marrying you was impulsive and reckless? Then it was the best impulsive, reckless decision either of us has ever made. Victoria reached up and cupped his face in her hands, feeling the slight stubble on his jaw. Alexander, I need you to tell me something, and I need you to be completely honest. What? When you kiss me, when you look at me, when you introduce me as your wife, is any of that real for you? Or am I just imagining something that isn't there? Alexander stared down at her for a long moment, his green eyes searching her face. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. Victoria, you're the most real thing that's ever happened to me. Then why are you fighting this so hard? Because I don't know how to be someone's husband. Really be someone's husband. I know how to run companies and negotiate deals and win board votes, but I don't know how to be the man you deserve. Victoria's heart nearly broke at the vulnerability in his voice. Alexander, you don't have to be perfect. You just have to be yourself. What if myself isn't enough? You are enough. You've always been enough. Alexander closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. Victoria, if we do this, if we make this real, I can't promise it will be easy. My world is complicated and my family is toxic, and there will always be people like Bartholomew trying to tear us down. I'm not afraid of your world, Alexander. I'm afraid of a world without you in it. When Alexander opened his eyes, Victoria saw everything she'd been hoping to see. Love, desire, and the kind of vulnerability that only came from complete trust. I love you, he said, the words coming out like a confession. I've been falling in love with you since the day you walked into my office and told me you might fall in love with me. I love your intelligence and your courage, and the way you make me feel like I'm more than just a collection of business achievements. Alexander, I love that you defend me against my family and challenge me when I'm being stubborn, and make me want to be worthy of the way you look at me. Victoria felt tears spilling down her cheeks. What are we going to do about Bartholomew? Alexander's arms came around her, pulling her against his chest. We're going to fight him, together, as partners, as husband and wife, as people who love each other, as people who love each other more than they love safety. When Alexander kissed her this time, it was nothing like their wedding kiss or the careful touches they'd shared before. This was desperate and honest, and full of weeks of suppressed longing. When they broke apart, Victoria was breathless and dizzy and completely certain that this was what she wanted for the rest of her life. So, she said, still in his arms, does this mean our business arrangement just became a real marriage? Alexander's smile was soft and genuine and completely devastating. Mrs. Blackwood, I think it became real the moment you said I do. It just took us a while to catch up. It took me a while to stop being terrified of how much I wanted it to be real. Victoria reached up and straightened his crooked tie, a gesture so domestic and intimate it made Alexander's heart skip. Well then, Mr. Blackwood, what do you say we go be terrifyingly, impulsively, recklessly in love? I say it's about time. As they stood there in their living room, holding each other and finally acknowledging what had been building between them for weeks, Victoria realized that sometimes the best decisions were the ones that scared you most. And sometimes fake marriages became real loves, became forever partnerships when you least expected it. But first, they had a cousin to defeat and a company to save. Together, Victoria Sterling Blackwood discovered that being genuinely in love with your husband made facing a corporate coup attempt significantly more tolerable, though she could have done without the death threats. What do you mean, death threats? Madison's voice rose 3 octaves over the phone. Victoria paced the penthouse living room, Alexander's laptop open on the coffee table displaying a series of increasingly hostile emails. Well, death threats might be strong. More like aggressively worded suggestions that I disappear permanently. From who? Anonymous accounts. But the language is very Bartholomew. Lots of Victorian-era insults and threats about knowing my place. Where's Alexander? Emergency board meeting. Bartholomew called it this morning, claiming Alexander's personal instability is affecting company performance. Victoria sank onto the couch, staring at the latest email which questioned both her ancestry and her right to exist in polite society. 3 days since their love confession, and Bartholomew had escalated from business sabotage to personal warfare. Vic, maybe you should stay home today. Absolutely not. Alexander needs me at the shareholders' lunch. We present a united front or Bartholomew wins. But if it's dangerous, Madison, I didn't marry into this family to hide when things get complicated. 2 hours later, Victoria stood in the Blackwood Industries conference room, watching Alexander command the room with the calm authority of someone born to lead. He was in his element, sharp, decisive, completely in control. Except for the barely visible tension in his jaw that told her he was furious. The Peterson merger, Alexander was saying, represents a strategic pivot that will position us ahead of market changes. The temporary setbacks we've experienced are exactly that, temporary. Temporary setbacks that have cost us $12 million, Bartholomew interjected smoothly from across the table. Perhaps it's time to consider whether personal distractions are affecting professional judgment. Victoria felt every eye in the room shift to her. She smiled serenely and made a note in her leather portfolio, as if Bartholomew had commented on the weather. Personal stability, Alexander replied, his voice like ice, is exactly what the board should be considering. The difference between building something lasting versus chasing quarterly profits. Interesting perspective from someone who married a complete stranger 6 weeks ago. The temperature in the room dropped noticeably. Victoria looked up from her notes, her pen poised over the paper. Actually, she said conversationally, we met 8 weeks ago, but I appreciate your attention to our timeline, Bartholomew. It shows how invested you are in Alexander's happiness. Several board members smiled. Bartholomew's expression soured. Of course, Mrs. Blackwood, though one wonders about the motivations behind such a rapid courtship. Victoria set down her pen and leaned back in her chair, every inch the confident woman who'd earned her place at this table. You know what I find fascinating about motivations, Bartholomew? Some people are motivated by love, partnership, and building something meaningful together. Others are motivated by fear, jealousy, and the desperate need to tear down what they can't create themselves. She paused, letting her words sink in. I'll let everyone decide which category they think applies here. The silence that followed was broken by James Morrison, Alexander's longtime business partner, clearing his throat. Perhaps we should focus on the quarterly projections. For the next hour, Victoria watched Alexander systematically dismantle every one of Bartholomew's arguments with facts, figures, and strategic vision that made it clear why he was the heir apparent. But she also noticed the way some board members glanced between the cousins, weighing loyalties and calculating odds. After the meeting, Alexander found Victoria on the building's rooftop garden, where she'd escaped for air and perspective. How bad is it? She asked without turning around. Bad, but not insurmountable. Alexander moved to stand beside her, both of them looking out over Manhattan. Bartholomew has more support than I anticipated. Because of me. Because of fear. Change makes people nervous, and our marriage represents change. Victoria turned to face him. Alexander, if I'm the problem, you're not the problem. You're the solution. Alexander's hands came up to frame her face. Did you see the way Morrison smiled when you handled Bartholomew? Or how Patricia Henderson nodded when you talked about building something meaningful? I saw some of them looking at us like we're a liability. Some of them. Not all. Alexander's thumb traced her cheekbone. Victoria, in 6 weeks you've become more valuable to this company than Bartholomew has been in 6 years. How do you figure? Because you make me better. Calmer, more focused, more willing to take strategic risks instead of playing it safe. The board is starting to see that. Victoria leaned into his touch. What's our next move? We show them that we're not just stable. We're formidable. That evening, Victoria was working in her study when Alexander appeared in the doorway, holding champagne and wearing an expression she couldn't read. We need to talk, he said. Victoria's stomach dropped. That's never good. Bartholomew made me an offer. What kind of offer? Alexander moved into the room, setting the champagne on her desk. He'll withdraw his challenge to my leadership if I agree to an amicable divorce within 6 months. Victoria felt the world tilt slightly. An amicable divorce. He claims it would show the board that I can make rational decisions when personal emotions conflict with business interests. I see. Victoria's voice was carefully neutral. And what did you tell him? I told him to go to hell. Relief flooded through Victoria so quickly she felt dizzy. Really? Really? Alexander moved closer, his green eyes intense. Victoria, I need you to understand something. 6 weeks ago, I married you to save my company. Today I would burn the entire company to the ground before I'd give you up. Alexander, I'm serious. Bartholomew can have the board, the presidency, the whole damn empire, but he can't have this. He can't have us. Victoria stood, moving around the desk to reach him. We're not giving up the company. Victoria? No, listen to me. You've spent your entire life building something meaningful. You've employed thousands of people, donated millions to charity, created a legacy your father would be proud of. We're not letting your cousin destroy that because he's jealous. What are you suggesting? Victoria smiled, the expression sharp and dangerous. I'm suggesting we stop playing defense and start playing offense. Meaning? Meaning I have an idea, but you're probably going to think it's crazy. Alexander laughed, pulling her into his arms. Victoria, I married a woman I'd known for a week to fulfill a will clause. My definition of crazy has evolved considerably. Good, because we're going to need Madison, your investigative contacts, in about 48 hours to pull this off. What exactly are we pulling off? Victoria's smile turned positively wicked. We're going to give the board exactly what they want. Proof of stability, commitment, and long-term thinking. How? By showing them that some people fight for what they love and others just fight to destroy what they can't have. Alexander studied her face, seeing the determination and intelligence that had first attracted him. What do you need? Complete access to Bartholomew's business records, a comprehensive background check going back 10 years, and your absolute trust that I know what I'm doing. Done. Anything else? Victoria reached up and loosened his tie, her fingers brushing against his throat. Just this. When she kissed him, it was with the confidence of a woman who'd found her place in the world and was prepared to fight for it. Mrs. Blackwood, Alexander murmured against her lips. Remind me never to underestimate you. Mr. Blackwood, you haven't seen anything yet. As they stood in her study, holding each other and planning their counterattack, Victoria realized that some battles were worth fighting, not because you were guaranteed to win, but because the alternative was losing everything that mattered. And Alexander Blackwood, brilliant, stubborn, unexpectedly vulnerable Alexander, mattered more than anything else in her world. Tomorrow they would show the board and Bartholomew exactly what they were up against. Tonight they would remind each other why they were fighting in the first place. Alexander? Yes? Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know that marrying you was the best decision I've ever made. Even if we lose everything? Victoria smiled, her eyes bright with love and determination. We're not going to lose. We're going to win. And then we're going to spend the rest of our lives proving that the best partnerships are built on love, not fear. Promise? I promise. But first they had a war to win. Victoria Sterling Blackwood had always believed that revenge was a dish best served cold. She'd never imagined it would taste quite so sweet when served with a side of eternal love and a hostile corporate takeover. The emergency board meeting was called for Friday at noon. By Thursday evening, Victoria had everything she needed to destroy Bartholomew Blackwood's reputation, his credibility, and his dreams of corporate domination. "Are you sure about this?" Alexander asked for the third time, pacing their bedroom while Victoria calmly laid out her evidence on the bed like a general preparing for war. "Alexander, stop pacing. You're making me nervous, and I need to be brilliant tomorrow." "You're always brilliant. Tomorrow I need to be devastatingly brilliant." Victoria held up a photograph that had cost Madison 3 favors and a bottle of expensive wine to obtain. Bartholomew at the Morrison yacht party last month, clearly intoxicated, making a deal with Senator Morrison's chief of staff. The same Morrison account that mysteriously developed problems right after this conversation. Alexander stopped pacing. "That's insider trading? Manipulation of federal contracts?" "Probably both." Victoria smiled sweetly. "But wait, there's more." She spread out bank records, phone logs, and email transcripts like a deck of cards. "Your dear cousin has been systematically bribing clients to withdraw from deals with you. The money trail leads directly to accounts in the Cayman Islands that he thought were untraceable. How did you? Your investigator contacts are very thorough. Also, Bartholomew apparently never learned that you should never put illegal activities in writing." Victoria held up a printed email. "This one is my personal favorite." He literally wrote, "Ensure Blackwood Industries loses the Peterson contract by any means necessary to a known corporate saboteur." Alexander stared at the evidence spread across their bed, then at his wife, who looked like an avenging angel in silk pajamas. "Victoria, you realize what this means?" "It means Bartholomew is finished. It also means you're going to be the uncontested leader of Blackwood Industries." She paused, her expression softening. "And it means we won." Alexander crossed the room and pulled her into his arms, spinning her around until she laughed. "Mrs. Blackwood, you are absolutely terrifying." "In a good way?" "In the best possible way." Friday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made Manhattan feel full of possibilities. Victoria dressed carefully in a navy blue suit that made her look like she could conquer Wall Street, while Alexander wore his most intimidating charcoal gray ensemble. They were armor-clad warriors heading into their final battle. The boardroom at Blackwood Industries was packed. Every member of the board was present, along with several investors and, unfortunately, Uncle Richard, who'd apparently come to witness what he expected to be Alexander's downfall. Bartholomew sat at the far end of the conference table, radiating confidence and wearing a smile that made Victoria want to slap him. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began smoothly, "I've called this meeting because recent events have made it clear that Blackwood Industries needs stable, experienced leadership. The losses we've sustained under Alexander's distracted leadership can no longer be ignored." Victoria watched Alexander's jaw tighten, but he remained perfectly composed. "The Peterson merger alone," Bartholomew continued, "cost us $12 million due to what can only be described as amateur negotiations, influenced by personal drama." "Interesting theory," Victoria said, rising from her seat with the grace of someone about to commit perfectly legal murder. "May I present an alternative explanation?" The room went silent. Bartholomew's confident smile faltered slightly. "Mrs. Blackwood," Uncle Richard interjected, "this is a board meeting, not a social gathering." "You're absolutely right," Victoria replied, moving to the presentation screen at the front of the room. "This is business, and business requires facts." She clicked the remote, and the first image appeared. Bartholomew at the yacht party, clearly drunk and shaking hands with Morrison's chief of staff. Fact 1. The Peterson merger didn't fail due to Alexander's negotiating skills. It failed because someone deliberately sabotaged it. The room erupted in murmurs. Bartholomew started to stand, but Victoria's next slide stopped him cold. Fact 2. Financial records showing systematic bribes paid to clients and competitors to withdraw from deals with Blackwood Industries. Note the signature on the authorization forms. Bartholomew's face had gone pale. Those documents are fabricated. Fact 3. Victoria continued relentlessly, clicking to the next slide. Email correspondence detailing plans to destroy Alexander's credibility and ensure his removal from leadership by any means necessary. All sent from Bartholomew Blackwood's personal email account. The silence in the room was deafening. Victoria could see board members exchanging glances, their expressions shifting from confusion to horror to anger. Fact 4. Victoria's voice was steady, professional, devastating. Bank records showing that approximately $2 million in company funds were diverted to offshore accounts controlled by Bartholomew Blackwood, ostensibly for consulting fees that were actually bribes and kickbacks. "This is impossible," Bartholomew sputtered. "You can't prove." "Actually," Alexander stood, his voice carrying the authority of someone born to command, "we can prove everything. The FBI Financial Crimes Unit is reviewing these documents as we speak." Uncle Richard had gone white. "Bartholomew, please tell me this isn't true." Bartholomew looked around the room like a trapped animal, his confidence completely shattered. It's not what it looks like. I was protecting the company by embezzling money and bribing clients." Victoria's voice could have cut glass. "Fascinating definition of protection." "You don't understand." Bartholomew's voice was desperate now. "Alexander doesn't deserve this company. He married a nobody to fulfill a will clause. He's weak." "He's weak?" Victoria stepped closer to the conference table, her presence commanding every eye in the room. "Alexander built this company into what it is today. He employs 3,000 people, donates millions to charity, and has never once put his personal interests above the good of this organization." She paused, letting her words sink in. "Unlike you, who was willing to destroy everything your uncle built because you couldn't accept that someone else was simply better than you." James Morrison, the longest-serving board member, cleared his throat. "I think we've heard enough. Bartholomew, you're terminated immediately and will be pursuing full legal action. Alexander, the board unanimously confirms you as permanent CEO of Blackwood Industries." The room erupted in applause. Victoria felt Alexander's hand find hers under the table, squeezing gently. "Furthermore," Patricia Henderson added, "I move to formally recognize Mrs. Blackwood as a strategic consultant to the company. Her investigative skills and business acumen have just saved us millions in potential losses." More applause. Victoria felt her cheeks flush with pride and accomplishment. As the board members filed out, congratulating Alexander and praising Victoria's presentation, Bartholomew approached their end of the table. "This isn't over," he said quietly, his voice full of venom. Victoria stood, meeting his gaze directly. "Yes, it is. It's completely over. And if you ever threaten my husband or his company again, you'll discover that what I did today was actually me being nice." After Bartholomew skulked away, Alexander and Victoria found themselves alone in the boardroom. "So," Alexander said, pulling Victoria into his arms, "how does it feel to single-handedly save $1 billion corporation?" "It feels," Victoria considered for a moment, "like the second best thing I've ever done." "What was the first?" "Marrying you." Alexander's kiss was soft, grateful, and full of promises for their future. When they broke apart, Victoria was slightly breathless. "Alexander?" "Yes? I think our business arrangement just became a full partnership." "In every sense of the word," Alexander agreed. "Partners in business, in life, in everything." Victoria smiled, the expression radiant with happiness and satisfaction. "I love the sound of that. Mrs. Blackwood?" "Yes?" "Welcome to your new position as the most powerful woman in Manhattan. Does it come with a good benefits package?" Alexander's smile was devastating. "It comes with me. Forever. Best deal I've ever made." As they stood in the boardroom where Victoria had just systematically destroyed their enemies and secured their future, Alexander realized that marrying her hadn't just fulfilled his father's will, it had fulfilled every dream he'd never dared to have. And Victoria realized that sometimes the most extraordinary love stories began with the most practical arrangements. Ready to go home, Mr. Blackwood? With you? I'm ready for anything. Hand in hand, they walked out of Blackwood Industries as true partners, knowing they'd just won more than a corporate battle. They'd won there forever. But the story of Victoria and Alexander Blackwood was just beginning. Epilogue. 1 year later, Victoria Sterling Blackwood stood in the same conference room where she'd destroyed Bartholomew's career. But today she was presenting quarterly reports as the official Chief Strategy Officer of Blackwood Industries. The Morrison account has exceeded projections by 30%, she announced to the board, and we've secured 3 new government contracts based on our reputation for ethical business practices. Alexander, now permanently installed as CEO, watched his wife command the room with the same pride he'd felt that first day she'd defended him. After the meeting, they found themselves on the roof garden where they'd planned Bartholomew's downfall. Any regrets? Alexander asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. Victoria leaned back against his chest, watching the Manhattan skyline glitter in the afternoon sun. About marrying a stranger for money? Never. Even though it turned out to be the real thing? Especially because it turned out to be the real thing. Alexander spun her around to face him, his green eyes bright with love and mischief. Mrs. Blackwood, I have something to tell you. What? I'm madly, desperately, completely in love with my wife. Victoria laughed, the sound bright and joyful. What a coincidence. I'm madly, desperately, completely in love with my husband. Think it'll last? Forever and always. And as Alexander kissed her beneath the New York sky, with their empire spread out below them and their entire future ahead of them, Victoria knew with absolute certainty that some fairy tales were worth fighting for. Especially the ones that began with the most unlikely words, I need a wife.